Good evening, everybody. We're back for another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardwan, along with my co-host, Julio Vela. What's going on, my friend?
I'm pumped. I'm excited. A lot of stuff going on today.
We got a lot of stuff going on this week.
You know, when...
You got plans for Easter? Going out of town?
You know, a wife, 3 kids, Easter egg hunt, barbecue grill, barbecue, Easter egg hunt.
Got you flying United Airlines this weekend?
Praise the Lord. Praise Jesus, too, on Sunday.
Are you taking United out of town?
I don't want to get beaten up. Man. I don't get charged up. I may be wrong, but people get charged for being disruptive on an airplane.
We're going to talk about that in a little bit. We got a great show tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get into a lot of great topics tonight. We've had some interesting stuff happen this week, as I'm sure you're aware. But we'll be with you for the next hour. We got our guest this evening, Assistant Federal Public Defender, Natalia Cornelio. Natalia, or Nata, should we call you?
Yes, Natalia.
That's what you prefer to be called.
Yes, my friends call me that.
Well,
Judges call me Miss Cornelio.
Right. They address you properly.
Right. You can call me Miss Cornelio. Nah.
I don't know if I'm ready to do that yet.
Yeah, that's weird.
We like to keep it casual.
I'll call you Miss Cornelio.
Oh, come on now. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
First time. Are you a viewer of our show?
Of course, one of
Don't lie.
10,000.
Okay. All right.
It's 8 to 10. It's 8 to 10, but that's fine.
So guys, we're going to be opening up the phone lines about 8:30. 713-807-1794 is the number. We also have Twitter up at HCCLA_TV, so you can send us your questions, your comments, and jump in on the conversation here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about locally, but I mean, I want to kind of talk about this United Airlines thing. I kind of made the joke whether you're taking United out of town this weekend, but as everybody knows, you can't have missed this. I mean, it's all over the news, all over social media. United's having a pretty bad week. One of their passengers was forcibly removed from an airplane for not getting up out of his seat when asked to, and it was a very strange deal, but essentially he wouldn't volunteer to leave when asked to volunteer to leave, so he was then made to leave. And talk about a PR nightmare. Now the guy is going, I guess he says he has a concussion, he's going to sue.
Good.
May need reconstructive surgery.
Good.
I think his quote was, "Everything hurts."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything hurts.
Yeah.
That's what it is,
I mean,
right?
dragged off an airplane in the manner in which he was, and by the authorities, it's not a comfortable feeling. I can imagine.
You've seen the media say that apparently this guy's been suspended from medicine, has drugs. Does that matter?
problems.
Does that even matter in this case? What do you say, Nada?
I hope not. I think it's shady that, first of all, United Airlines overbooked. I mean, I heard a guy gets dragged off the plane. I'm like, what's going on? He must be a terrorist. Like, something's going on. Why are they dragging someone off a plane? He's threatening passengers, refusing to get off because he's doing something horrible. And I learned that he was chosen supposedly randomly, which, what are the odds that this was random now that we've learned as much about him as we have? But he's randomly chosen to volunteer his seat because the flight is overbooked. I would be pissed.
Well, I think
Can I say
everybody would, but you know, I mean, and you talk about being disruptive. I mean, you've seen it at the Federal Public Defender's Office. People get charged federally with disrupting a flight, being aggressive to other passengers, being aggressive to, the flight staff.
Is that a misdemeanor, felony? What is that on the federal side? I don't do much over there.
Depends. It could be one or the other. I mean, they have different varying charges depending on how aggressive you are and what you do.
I thought a ranger or something was supposed to be on flights. Why are they calling in the air marshal? Federal agent? No.
Right. Federal air marshal.
Federal. Why isn't he popping up and removing these people? Why are they calling the local cops?
Well, because they like to keep the air marshals' identities. No. Don't you watch movies, man?
So if
People sneak up on the.
I think Wesley Snipes, Passenger 57.
But this guy, no fault of his own.
No, and
is asked to get off the plane because the flight's been overbooked. I mean, come on.
Well, I think we all would be mad in that situation. You know, I mean, the flight's overbooked. Now, there is obviously when you purchase a ticket, there's a lot of fine print that we don't read, and I'm sure within there, and I've seen some articles out there that talk about the fact that you know, hey, look, if there's certain situations where you can be you can be asked to volunteer, and if you don't, you can be, you know, then bumped from the plane. But I don't think it gives them the right to forcibly remove you like that. I mean,
Is it a trespass? What gives them the right to do that? Do you wait? Do you consent to that if you buy the ticket?
yes. So apparently within the fine print, which none of us read, even though we're all lawyers and probably should read the fine print, none of us ever do. I mean, and there's, you know, those litany of disclaimers in there on just about everything that you sign when you purchase stuff. And apparently one of them is in certain situations, and I don't know for sure, I'd have to go back and look at the overbooking situation, but obviously if there is someone who needs, you know, to get somewhere because of an emergency, or somebody who is, you know, underage and flying alone, there's certain scenarios where you can be asked to give up your seat, and they'll compensate you. They'll, you know, they offer you a ticket, you know, some sort of credit or something like that for it, for the inconvenience.
And that's why this guy talked about his medical
Right.
needs that he had the
Exactly.
next day, and they should have just listened to him.
I know. It
Wait,
is.
so Nata, is it they removed the guy because he's Asian, or did they not?
I mean, I don't have complete evidence to support that claim, but
Well, that's what's going to be interesting. I mean, once they get into the discovery on the civil lawsuit, I mean, this guy has sued, the lawyer he's hired has sued United before. So they've already filed, I think, and I'm not sure how it works in Illinois exactly, but I don't know if they filed a full lawsuit or just a pre-suit preservation of evidence type of motion that, you know, asking them to preserve basically all the data regarding the flight and, you know, any communications. I mean, there's going to be some interesting stuff, I'm sure, as to how they chose this passenger.
Can you imagine if there's an email or a text that says, "Oh yeah, this Dow guy,
Yeah.
he's out."
he's
Can
top
you
choice.
Can you imagine? I think their stocks already dropped like $1 billion for the day, and I really mean it was like $1 billion, if I'm not mistaken, on market value. Can you imagine if they find an email that says, "Pick the first Asian guy you see," or how about this guy? Can you imagine? And look, I don't pass it by human beings to do something.
No, I don't either.
that.
But I mean, what are your options?
But this is, I mean, in my opinion, this was United Airlines' options from the beginning, right? You offer money to passengers. Somebody's going to volunteer at some number, not too far above $800 or whatever they were offering. Someone's going to volunteer. There's no reason to resort to your policy of forcibly removing someone off the plane who doesn't want to get off the plane.
There's going to
Now,
be somebody who's willing to take that credit.
talk about cost
When the
at
price
this
gets high
point.
enough.
You're going to get sued when you touch somebody.
Bump
matter
it to
what.
1,000. Bump it to $850.
Yeah.
$850 and a
Go-
million drink tickets.
yeah, go
I mean,
ahead.
5
Yeah.
free flights. You don't even have to give money. Just
Yeah.
like you can fly for free
Yes.
one time
Yes.
on top of the money.
You know, there's some dude on that plane who's going to be like, I'll let the wife go back and I'll catch the next flight. I mean, you know, there's somebody like that. Had they just found him, I mean, you get the price high enough.
was
There's somebody willing to do that.
I was listening to NPR this morning. They had this game theorist in from maybe Harvard or some other place, where they said, "Oh, if they had just offered $850 or $900, that at some point, human nature, somebody would have jumped up." And they had all these game theory
So you're saying I
analysis.
stole my idea from NPR?
No, I am saying that
that
similar
is-
minds think alike.
Ah, okay.
You like that? That was quick.
That was
Julio,
super
way to
defense
recover.
lawyer.
Yeah, that was a nice recovery.
Yeah.
You managed to pull yourself out of that one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how.
It's like number 8 of 10 today.
Okay, so this guy's going to sue, but realistically, you know, we don't have that many airlines.
I know.
So what are you to do? You know, I mean, okay, we can say we're going to boycott United. Well, here in Houston, guess what? They kind of rule the roost in terms of your options of flying. I mean, Southwest can only get you so far, and you have to
That's true.
stop every 3 cities in order to get there.
That's true.
You know, so if you want to catch a direct flight from here, United's kind of like the only game in town. I mean, it is. I mean, you can get some American flights and Delta flights and all that, or you can catch Spirit, which I would be loath to do.
But they are a business, so unlike the president, they will change
Right.
subject to popular demands, not as quickly as we would like, but more than
Can
government
they split
bureaucracy.
back and just give us back Continental?
I remember Continental.
Well, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Julio.
I think I went to Aspen
Back
on
like you were
Continental.
5. You know? Oh, I remember flying Continental.
Remember.
I harken back to my youth. No, it wasn't that long ago.
But did you see the video where he came back on the plane, completely delusional, running through the aisles?
That part's crazy.
It's
Well, he's-
wacky.
He's bleeding.
Is he that? Is he just okay? So the argument is that he's just at this point. Officers have forcibly removed him from the plane. He's going crazy. He's been beaten up. He has blood everywhere, and then he just goes nuts and runs down the aisle, screaming some weird like, "I must die or kill me now" or something. I think I would go. Look. I'd go nuts too if that happened to me. I suppose I would.
You go straight valley on him?
I'd go straight valley on him. Did you see the other Facebook post though? It's happened recently. A lot of individuals on planes acting up. I don't know.
People
leave it
just,
at that.
but you know, the other thing too is the rules in terms of screening that we're all upset with. I mean, we've seen a lot of pat downs here that have gotten really aggressive lately. But all those rules, and just looking at the other side of things, and I don't really like it. I mean, look, it's added all this time to your air travel. It's really, but they have been, and some people will argue, well, it's an intrusion. We're giving up our
Right.
freedoms, but there is some element that it is there for passenger safety as well.
Well, and that's the idea, at least for search and seizures.
Right.
And you all chime in, at least at the checkpoints, if I'm not mistaken, your personal freedom or consent to government intrusion is greater at international checkpoints or at international hubs. And so you're technically, at least under the law, you're consenting to a more intrusive invasion of your privacy. I don't know. I mean, I don't do much federal stuff, and so most of my stuff's local. But is that what you all understand the law, state of the law to be, or different?
Yeah, I mean, when you're coming into the country, I mean, you are, you're not supposed to be carrying things. I'll give you a great story from my college days when we might have gone to across the border in South Padre a couple times, but you come across the border. I'm sure you guys have done it too, where you use back in the day, you used to be able to just show a driver's license.
Right.
Now you have to have a passport, and you may not get back in if you don't have a passport. But it is a serious deal because you're not supposed to bring stuff back in contraband and everything back into the country, and so they're checking for that. So one of my roommates at the time, we had perhaps done some underage drinking, and although it was legal, but he decided that he wanted some souvenir cups, and he was stuffing them in the pockets of his cargo shorts and everything. And so there's a big bulge in his pants as we're walking back across the border, and one of those customs agents yanked him, threw him up against the wall, and it's just cups.
Yeah.
But I mean, you go walking across the border with cargo shorts with giant bulges sticking out,
You're gonna get searched.
you're gonna get searched.
You're gonna get searched.
I mean, you're setting yourself up to be messed with.
But the law does distinguish between, and I feel nerdy compared to your story of underage drinking. Unlike underage drinking, I can tell you that the law distinguishes between private agents and government agents. So
Absolutely.
a United Airlines attendant taking somebody off the plane is significantly different than.
But what if the United agents, then United calls upon the police officers of the local force? Is that not state action at that point?
I mean, that's a tougher one. There's definitely an argument that it's, privately.
I don't know.
If it's a cop working for United because there's a violation of a United rule, then
Yeah.
there's not any authority.
And so
for that.
here's the thing. I mean, if they ask him to leave, and this is be interesting, what we don't have, obviously we don't have the full story yet. We have the video. It's been sensationalized on the news about the treatment of the passenger. But for it to get to the point where the police actually come and forcibly remove him, I gotta think that he must have gotten to a point where the United staff believed he was being a disruptive passenger. And so at that point, they probably felt that they had the ability to call in law enforcement and say, hey, look, we believe this guy is being disruptive to the process and, you know, being disruptive on an airplane. So I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
there's always a bunch of sides to every story, and I'm sure this is going to have a lot of angles to it.
It will. I still hope that guy gets a lot of money.
United sucks.
I mean, at this point, the damage has been done, so it's like, I don't know that it'll get a lot of money. But speaking of screw-ups, let's turn to what we learned this week in Harris County. Julio, you were able to you forwarded to me the actual memorandum, but this week it comes out that an HPD crime scene investigator, Houston Forensic Science, right? Or was
Right.
he with HPD?
It's the crime lab. So here's the rub.
Right. And that's why I asked, because there's kind of this.
Here's the rub. Law enforcement says, hey, quit pointing the problem at the law enforcement. It's the Houston Forensic Science Center people who are coming out, the CSIs coming out, doing the investigation, and not testing the bloody blanket that's next to the victim.
And so in this case, right, and so in this case, they have found that one officer, in the memorandum says it was case records completed by an HPD officer assigned to the Houston Forensic Science Center as a crime scene investigator. So he's kind of got a dual role.
These are these dual roles.
Right. And so this officer / crime scene investigator was found to have 65 errors in cases in 88 cases that they reviewed. I mean,
You have to literally watch in your imagination the panel. Hey, so why didn't you test that bloody towel that was next to the victim? Why didn't you test that empty shell casing? Why didn't you take photos of that victim? Why didn't you take latent prints at the scene? And each of his answers are, on the memo says, oh yeah, I forgot. That's probably something I should have done. No, I don't think that empty shell case was really relevant.
yeah, the quote from the memorandum is, later, after being notified of errors, he responded, I knew that, and I forgot to do that.
Do you see this? Well, I mean, talk to me about this. Y'all do the federal work. Is this a local problem, or is this some like a greater issue with forensics in the country?
Well, I mean, it varies from agency to agency, okay? And I think that, and Natalia, you're feel free to jump in, but you know, on the federal side, you see some cases are brought by state authorities. HPD, you have all these task force that work in conjunction. I'll give you an example. There's a lot of these robbery cases. They end up starting as a state investigation, okay? So HPD, the constables, the precincts, that's where the investigations will start, okay? A store, a phone store, or a jewelry store is hit. And so who makes the initial scene? It's the local law enforcement agency, whether it's HPD, whether it's the constable. And then as it starts to build, they put it into the database and they find out, oh, well, the description matched the same one as this one over in Pasadena. And then they start linking it up and they put it together that it's a series of robberies by the same crew, okay? And so then they call ATF or the FBI and they get the federal authorities involved and they take what normally is state cases, and this is, I'm sure you've argued the same thing, is we constantly go, this is a state case. And they arrest these guys at the state level, they'll have them sit in jail while they build the case, and then they'll suck them all up into a big federal Hobbs Act conspiracy where you're looking at 50 to 150 years in jail on a conspiracy to commit all this stuff. And so, for instance, I had a case I tried a couple years ago on one of those cases, and it's not that the forensic work was sloppy, it was the cataloging of the work that was so sloppy. We're 3 days into trial, and HPD discovers 14 discs of witness interviews.
Is that the mistrial you got?
Correct. And so it comes up because Suntran was we were getting supplements literally as up until the day trial is starting. We're getting additional offense supplement reports because there's so many of these things, you know? And so he's going through it while we're starting the case, and he finds a gap, an error, and he's like, wait a second, we don't have this, we don't have this, we don't have this. And it was because HPD had failed to catalog everything correctly and just forgot to turn over all these critical witness interviews, including one of Son and Wendy Pastori's client. And so, you know, you've probably seen some others with the actual forensic evidence on the federal side as well, but that's been my experience, is that it varies from agency to agency. Really.
Right, and the feds deal with specific federal agencies. Sometimes they pick up state cases, stuff that should have been a state case, but they deal with ATF, ICE, DHS.
Do you, as a
PI.
in the federal world, do you deal with a lot of? I mean, what are the routine or agencies that you deal with, and how important are forensics to your work?
That's a good question. There's not a ton of forensics. The FBI does computer forensics in some of our computer-related crime cases, and then drugs always have lab work involved, and the DEA has a different lab system. Sometimes they rely on the state. The state's labs are different. The feds, I think, in all fairness to the state, as much as there is sloppiness I see more in state investigations, the feds don't turn over as much stuff.
Really?
They're on to problems in evidence, and if you don't ask, you don't find out, and sometimes you're not entitled to it under federal law. So maybe some of the mistakes we don't even get to find out about unless we really dig sometimes, and there's a reason to dig.
So are you saying in the state courts we have like the Michael Morton Act, and we are starting to get used to, which apparently used to be something different in the state court, but kind of open discovery. Is that not the practice on the federal side? Is that things you don't see?
No, it is. I mean, Rule 16, frankly, is a lot more comprehensive than 3914, than the state rules. So the federal Rule 16 is, in my opinion, a lot more comprehensive, and it actually requires reciprocal discovery.
Really?
Yeah, and so now, as a defense lawyer, you rarely ever have reciprocal discovery to give over, of course, in a case. But
right.
But so here's the interesting thing, and I can't remember a case, and maybe you have, Natalia, here locally, but you've seen it in other areas of the country where the feds are pursuing, for instance, a child pornography case, but they don't want to have to reveal a specific the way they go, their matrices and their
software
and everything, their software, because you are entitled to that under Rule 16. If you make the request, if you make a very tailored request, you'll get it, because Rule 16 requires them to turn it over. And this goes to a lot about with the NSA and wiretaps and everything else, and you'll see where people will get up to the line and requesting information. And if the FBI or the NSA or whoever doesn't want to reveal proprietary investigatory information or how they got to stuff, they'll just dump the case. They'll just cut it off, And so
it's kind of like revealing a snitch on the state side,
right?
Where I'd imagine they cut the case on the federal side too in the certain circumstances, but on the state side, information's power, and they'll cut the case on the state side if the snitch is not compliant or is not something that needs to be there. Do you all see on the federal side, on your end, have you all seen any of the Stingray stuff? There's a recent article on how much Stingray impacts law enforcement. In other words, they're just out there just scooping up like one big whale fish all of our cell phone information. Have you all seen that? Have you seen it, Nata? Have you been exposed to it at all? Or have you seen any new scientific things that are coming out on the Fed side?
Yeah, and I don't personally, in my cases right now, I haven't had to deal with it, but there is the torrent, what's the program, Tor?
The Tor, T-O-R.
Yeah, in computer crime
right.
cases where the government there's one famous case right now, I forget if it's the Tor one, but the federal government created a website that was in and of itself distributing child pornography.
Yep.
And giving it to people. And when that kind of came up among defense lawyers, they started fighting it like, hey, we got this from the government, and at some point they did stop prosecuting some of those cases because they didn't want to publicly admit that they were distributing child pornography, which is supposedly something that they were going to be protecting. And it's an example of sometimes investigations are more trying to catch people, but not stopping the thing that you're intending to stop, like drugs or child pornography,
And I mean, remember when we talked about the case with the San Bernardino terrorists where they were trying to unlock the iPhone, and they had all those cases where they were trying to compel Apple to unlock the iPhone? The reality is, they know how to unlock the iPhone. They don't want to have to disclose what their proprietary way of unlocking the iPhone is. So they would rather get a court order that Apple have to do it, so that if a case ever comes where they have to then disclose to the defense, what the process was for unlocking the phone, they can hand over Apple's version of how to do it rather than their own proprietary way of unlocking it. I fully believe that that's what happened, and that they didn't want Apple to unlock the phone because they couldn't get it. That's just a ruse. They could get it done. They just didn't want to have to turn over their methods for doing it because they'd be required to do so.
For using things like the child pornography as a lure or not revealing proprietary information, can the government do that on the Fed side? I know we have, on the state side, they can lie and cheat and do anything they want. On the federal side, is that the same way? Do y'all see that? I mean, they're using child porn as a little lure, like, hey, come check us out, and then we'll catch you.
It feels on the Fed side like they lie and cheat too. But what they do maybe instead, or in addition to lying and cheating, is just get the lowest man on the totem pole. I mean, just real easy people to catch. It's not, at the end of the day, an operation of stopping crime. It's an operation of having a lot of people employed in stopping crime, and then it looks like you're stopping crime because you're getting a bunch of people for little things.
How long have you been a federal public defender, and what drove you to be there?
Oh, it's like an interview.
I'm just asking you. It sounds good. I'm interested.
5.5 years. Honestly, the federal public defender side, I was working at a federal court of appeals, and I had wanted to be a public defender, believing in the cause and everything, and I learned that they put people in jail for illegally re-entering the country after being deported, and I was like, what? They put people in jail for that? What kind of crazy nonsense is this? And so I wanted to work closer to the border and become familiar with representing people in that law. I care a lot about that. Personally, I don't think that it's right to put people in jail for status issues or trespassing or anything political. You don't like immigration, that doesn't mean you get to put a bunch of people in jail for it. So that drew me to this work in particular. And but I like the trial aspect of it, the being in court, the representing people, getting to know clients, stuff like that.
Where are you from? You said you came to this area. Are you from the north?
I'm from Chicago.
You're from Chicago?
Yeah.
Really? Obama's hometown.
He taught at my law school.
No, yes, he did. Were you his? No,
I never had him.
right.
I never had him.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Is his picture up there somewhere?
Probably.
So, okay, so Sessions just issued a statement, as he's done multiple times, but just recently about we're going to deport these individuals, establish the rule of law, and protect our borders.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? Sessions is he seems to be undoing a lot of things, and I don't know what it's being replaced with. He seems to be pretty anti-civil rights. I think I read an article that he had called for the investigation into programs that had been created in counties to review police use of force. And it had been a compromise in a lot of different places of, how are the police using force, and let's review this. And he wants to review all of the compromises made, agreements made within those counties to review police use of force. And make sure that the Civil Rights Department of the Department of Justice is going to be doing that. So instead of aggressively enforcing civil rights, including times when police violate people's civil rights. They're going to see if, police and community-friendly programs are not consistent enough with the rule of law, which sounds
So let's,
And now he wants to suspend the Forensic Science Commission as well.
right.
yeah.
I mean, here we are talking about our own Forensic Science Commission. They can't get it right here.
65 out of 88.
65 out of 88. That's not a good percentage.
Nope.
There's a guy by the name of Michael Morton where there's a bandana kind of on the way or in the area of the scene that wasn't tested. And then they end up convicting this guy by the name of Michael Morton, and he spends a whole bunch of time in prison. And then when they challenge his conviction, they say, you probably should have tested this bandana. And that for CSI area said, oh yeah, we knew about the bandana, but we never tested it, and we didn't give it to the defense. And whoops, I should have thought about that. Yeah, these things happen, and 65 cases have been compromised. 65 lives have been compromised. And all you have to say for it is, whoops, people are dying, being sent to death row. These are murders, these are rapes, these are police shootings. And it's embarrassing for the Houston Forensic Science Center and anyone that's been employed by them to be in this position and having to go through this type of debacle.
Yeah, it
done.
really is.
I'm done with that.
We're gonna open up our phone lines now, ladies and gentlemen. We reached the halfway point of the show. 713-807-1794 is the number. Call in with your questions for Julio, myself, or Nata.
Nata, let me ask you. So you're here. So what's the next step? Where are you going now? What's up? The Texas Civil Rights Project?
That's right.
What's the Texas Civil Rights Project?
So I'm right now an assistant federal public defender. The Texas Civil Rights Project is a nonprofit. They're based out of Austin, and I'm going to be the director of the Criminal Justice Reform Project. So I want all of the people watching and you guys to know that the Texas Civil Rights Project is a resource, a litigation-based resource for civil rights violations, stuff that you all see going on in the community. It's just a group that can either do the litigation or will, definitely try to be helpful in making sure that stuff, shifting, the narrative of stuff that's messed up. I've gotten a lot of information in the time that I've been a public defender about stuff that's broken in the court system, stuff that's broken in the bail bond system, stuff that's broken in the jails. And, just to add a voice to people suing where stuff's broken and trying to bring Harris County and Texas up to par with the rest of the country in some ways.
Most of the time, when somebody hears civil rights, they think Martin Luther King, they think Cesar Chavez, they think civil rights movement, and they don't understand what a civil rights action is. So please enlighten us. When someone says my civil rights have been violated, it doesn't mean that and it could mean, but among other things, that they stopped you from marching down the street and exercising some civil rights, but it also includes other violations. And if someone were to say my civil rights are violated and I need some help, what kind of claim would it be, and what would be kind of the story around that? Like, what does that mean, civil rights action?
And I think civil rights activists, I mean, I don't know every single one, but, my draw to it is more based in human rights, philosophically and psychologically. But technically, it's rights based in the law, like rights that you have a legal basis to assert. And when those rights aren't being met, you can sue the government or an actor who violated your civil rights, depending on what the laws are. But
what are some of those? Because people throw that around, unfortunately. My civil rights were violated. I mean, I hear that all the time. And it just seems to get thrown around too much by people. You'll hear people say that, or you'll hear people say, this isn't the America I knew, and that sort of stuff. And so I think people really don't have a firm grasp. I mean, all you got to do is watch some of the late night talk shows and watch them go out and have the man on the street interviews, and you realize people don't really have a firm grasp of just of some basic concepts of our government, much less understanding what actually constitutes a civil rights violation under our laws.
Fair, and I think it's living and breathing, but civil rights, you mentioned Martin Luther King. Historically, the Civil Rights Act, of 1964 and the ending of Jim Crow, a lot of it is, based under the idea of equal protection under the law. It comes from the 14th Amendment, the Civil Rights Act, which, granted people non-discrimination for certain reasons. Something like HERO, a very controversial,
Sure.
legislative piece that was tried to be passed in Houston last election cycle, that was trying to be a Houston-based civil rights statute. What it was going to do was give people in Houston the right to sue if their civil rights were violated by, a business or person or organization on the basis of race, gender, all of the things that HERO covered. And it was not just so that you don't have to go into federal court because your civil rights are violated.
Right.
You can go to Houston court and say, hey, give me $500.
Municipal, right?
Municipal court. You violated my civil rights under Houston civil right protection law.
So if somebody were to say, I'm not going to bake a cake for a gay couple, or if somebody said, I'm not going to serve someone in a wheelchair, or if someone were to say, I'm not letting these guys in because they're black, we could sue, right? Would that be, so you're essentially going from defense to prosecuting claims. Is that right?
I mean, it's not going to be in criminal court, so
No,
it's
right?
completely different. I think, I would see them as more similar in the sense that right now I see my work as, representing people.
Right.
And helping advise them of what their rights are and making sure that their rights weren't violated. And, would be in the other direction to make sure that the laws, or that the people and the governments and the businesses are doing what they're supposed to do under the law. But I'm not going to put anyone in jail.
No.
That's an important difference.
Unless you're Paxton. No, I'm just saying.
Oh man,
but
you're gonna comment on that?
those guys are coming to Houston. Yeah,
are.
Paxton Trout's coming to Houston. But going back to a cognizant, colorable claim under 1983. So is Texas Civil Rights Project a nonprofit? Do y'all recover damages? And what entities would you be suing under the criminal section?
So it isn't working. I haven't been working there yet.
Right, sure.
So I'm going to limit how much I talk about it. They have, they are a nonprofit, and it depends.
Fair.
It depends.
Fair. Well, I know that if nobody speaks up to the Harris County jail, the Texas jails and or federal facilities who are violating people's rights, there needs to be a voice. And if I'm not mistaken, you are going to continue to be that voice, but just in a different role.
Hopefully. That's my goal.
That's exciting.
It is exciting.
I'm curious your thoughts, Nada, on the DOJ is backpedaling from the previous administration and cutting off private prisons, the use of private prisons. They're now going to still maintain the private prisons here in Houston. Of course, we have both the FDC and the Joe Corley Detention Center,
Right.
where it's just a night and day difference.
Yes.
And I don't think people really understand how that whole what Joe Corley does, what it was intended for, and how just what it means in terms of the strain on resources for not just the PD's office, but all attorneys, the Criminal Justice Act appointed attorneys, and even private attorneys. If you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the disadvantages I think that, of private prisons is that it makes it okay or easier to put more people in prison, which I
Right.
think just as a society, we don't take that seriously enough. Putting someone in jail is a big deal. So to do that, I think it shouldn't just be, they broke a law. I mean, we should really think about what those laws are even. Like, yeah, that's against the law, but
Yeah.
jail, that means separation from everyone you love, of all your responsibilities, no hugs maybe. I mean, that's a big deal to me. Your friendship, your
Sure.
relationships are strained,
Sure.
and your
Sure.
ability to be a meaningful member of society are strained. So that's first and foremost. Joe Corley and FDC, I mean, the difference between the private and the federal prison in this case, you know, my clients are in jail pre-trial mostly. And that's because they're not given a bond for whatever reason. Frankly, a lot of my clients aren't given a bond because they don't have status to be here. Not because they did something bad, not because they're dangerous people, but because, you know, the law doesn't favor them being out when they're gonna figure out if they committed a crime or not, whatever that crime is.
Is that a human right? You think
Issue.
so?
I mean,
You think it's a human right, or is it law and order?
well, that's a topic for, I mean, that's a long conversation.
I don't know.
but
What do you think?
I don't know about putting people in jail for something like that, but let me just tell you, this is somebody who is presumed innocent under the law, and before they've been convicted of anything, just because, you know, they don't have documents, and they're in usually Joe Corley pre-trial because they have more space. Joe Corley Detention Facility is the private prison. It's in Conroe. They have about 10 to a room, 8 to 10 to a room, in a cell. It's toilet and table in the same cell. So if you have a rude person, you know, that doesn't want to have a cooperative agreement to not do that at the same time that you're eating,
Right.
it's going to be a really unpleasant experience for as long as your case gets resolved. And frankly, when my clients are in Joe Corley, you know, I don't ever rush them. They have a complete right to look at their evidence, think about what they want to do. But I feel rushed because that means they're going to be stuck in there longer. Like, if their case can be resolved, the sooner the better, you know, then I want to get to them as quickly as possible because I don't want them stuck there.
I didn't know it was that bad in Joe Corley also.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think a lot of people know that we do have a private prison here in the Houston area.
Conroe, Texas.
Right, that's operating, and it does. I mean, from I think it does. You are putting profits on the criminal justice system, and you're taking what should be a government function and turning it into something that somebody else can now profit off of. And I don't know, that has always, that notion has always kind of set wrong with me. I mean, there are certain instances where the relationship between government and a government contractor, if you will, makes sense. You know, military, operations, NASA, for instance. I mean, having both the public and private to work on the space program, or, you know, other defense type situations or technology or anything like that. Yeah, it makes sense. But it doesn't make sense with regard to how we incarcerate people, because it only leads to more incarceration.
Yeah.
It must have been about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I heard, I was listening to NPR, where a private prison transport got in a wreck, a bunch of inmates died. Turns out the private prison guard wasn't credentialed to drive the van. Turns out the inmates weren't strapped properly up to standards. Turns out the response team wasn't adequate or equipped to handle the problem either. And the argument was, and so there's a big lawsuit in federal courts up north somewhere, probably in between Kentucky and that area, where, the argument is the private prisons, they don't have control, they're cutting costs where costs shouldn't be cut, and they're profit motive, and they're profit driven. And this is why this huge debacle occurred. And the argument is that it should be back to the government. And then this week we have the government leaving 2 inmates in a bus outside on the street. And if you read the report that I send out, somebody on the street heard yelling and noises from the bus on the side of the road.
And that was for Harris County Jail.
This is for Harris County Jail. Heard noises and called the police and said, hey, I think there's people in this bus on the side of the street that's just kind of banging and screaming. Turns out there's 2 guys that they left on the bus for 10 hours, violated 2 provisions of the minimum safety requirements that you have to have a county jail. And you think, is private better or is government better? But they're both a disaster. They're both a disaster.
They are.
You know, and I'm looking, and so I'm looking through the, there's about 19 or 15 counties that are not in compliance. And I went through the complaints, and there's 2 counties that have 2 screw-ups, only 2. It's Harris County and Waller County. Harris County, where people go to jail and die, and Waller County, where you go to die. And both of us have the worst complaints. People over in Waller County, there's officers who aren't even credentialed to be jailers, who are running the jail. Here in Harris County, you got a guy who dies a month ago, and you got inmates left on the bus on the side of a street this week. As part of the Texas Civil Rights Project, are these things that you guys go after? Are these things, like, what's your opinion on that?
The cases that the Texas Civil Rights Project has right now in the area of criminal justice reform has to do with deaths in prison due to lack of air conditioning. And I think in that case, the government had responded, well, we gave them water, and then they learned that the water was had traces of undrinkableness to it that were really high. And so that's definitely something that the Texas Civil Rights Project.
Did you hear about that guy up north where they put him in a hot bath in the prison and then he died? We talked about it last week on the show.
That was in Florida.
In Florida, pardon me. They threw a guy in prison. What's the story?
In the scalding shower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They threw a mental ill patient into the scalding shower, died, and as they're taking him away, with no regard or respect to the human body, he's dead and his skin's falling off.
Did you ever see the Zimbardo? Did you ever hear about the Zimbardo prison experiment?
Is it that when you dress like a guard and you dress like an inmate, your relationship changes? What is that? Explain.
That's the what I learned that made me want to be a public defender and change my view about jails. And it applies to everything that I see. It's a psychologist back in the 60s or 70s. He had randomly selected people. They're all equally mentally healthy. He made some guards, some prisoners, and just randomly. And he had an experiment set up where he set up Stanford University as a jail, some basement somewhere. The guards and the prisoners, he made the prisoners shave. He gave them a number. He made them wear clothes, shave their heads.
Sounds like some sort of Silence of the Lambs.
He had them
project.
Arrested on the street to begin the process of being humiliated like a prisoner. And they weren't really prisoners. They hadn't actually done anything wrong. But within a couple of days, the guards were mistreating the prisoners were protesting, the guards were getting, acting up and figuring out what to do about these riots. It was crazy, and violence erupted, people were traumatized. He had to stop the experiment early, and it did show that kind of putting people in a dynamic where you're supposed to treat someone like a prisoner, like they're less than you, affects how you can behave towards them. So I think as a society and in jails, you have to be really mindful of how to balance that kind of position, how to train people to deal with stuff so that you're not mistreating people just because you see them as a prisoner or having done something wrong. I learned that there's a country in Europe, I don't remember which one, that there's less suicide among jail guards because they have a dual social worker prison guard role. I'm not saying necessarily that's what we should do, but something like that.
Wow.
I mean, here's the thing. So,
holistic approach.
You've seen a lot of, obviously, unfortunately, as a lawyer in the federal system, more often than not, your clients are going to prison.
Yeah.
There are very few instances where your client doesn't go to prison.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so rare that you get a probation or a time served or something. It's like a unicorn in the federal system almost.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the default position is
Jail.
we're going to send people to prison. And at this point, I've seen so many nonviolent offenders go to prison for such long periods of time. I mean, at what point does, whether it's the Texas Civil Rights Project or the ACLU or somebody, step in and do something about putting parole back into the federal system and trying to make this a more reasonable system. I mean, say what you will about the sentencing guidelines, but when do we get to the point where people are not serving 85% of a 20 and 30-year sentence for a nonviolent offense? How can we get to that point? What's the solution?
Ooh, that's a good one. I had heard that, I mean, you maybe know this, but back when the federal system did have parole, were you practicing then?
No,
Okay, that was a while
that
ago.
was a long time ago.
That was back before the guidelines.
Correct.
Okay. Because the rumor was that, they got rid of parole at a time where judges would give these ridiculously long sentences in federal court, so parole didn't make a difference anyway. But, I mean, I'd be into reinstituting parole. I wonder if it would have the effect of making judges give longer sentences. I know some that probably would.
Some probably would.
But, yeah, that would be good.
This is extraordinarily interesting because I don't know too much about parole in the federal system. So
There's
what?
none.
Oh, right. Okay.
None.
So
Zero.
is there? I mean, is there not for the viewers? Talk to me about the difference between parole in state and federal court.
Well, I think also the biggest difference that you have to realize is that in federal court, you don't have the option of having the jury assess sentence.
Yeah.
Really?
It's all done by the
Interesting.
judge. So,
The appointed for life judge, some of them have been doing it for a long time.
and your point is well taken that if they do put parole back in, some of these judges will just compensate for that by giving, a long sentence. Now to some degree, it depends on how the guidelines and whether you can upwardly adjust and everything else. And I mean, that's such a legal minutia topic to discuss that we only got, less than 10 minutes left. One, it's boring for people, but we don't have enough time to talk about
Absolutely fascinating. I think.
but-
It's,
But I think aside from the parole, and feel free to chime in, Natalia, but aside from the parole, the fact that you are basically only have one person as an option to assess punishment is also, I think, part of the problem with the federal system to some degree.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
and they're guided by the guidelines, right? I mean, I've had 3 or 4 federal cases in my time, and so.
Yeah, and I mean, look, to me, there's the problems with our federal system. There are really, in my opinion, 3 major ones. Okay, and that is, of course, no parole, the extensive sentences that are being given for nonviolent offenses, and the ability of prosecutors to really manipulate charges in such a way that force you into a situation where your client, rather than attempting to fight the case, settles for a lesser charge in order to avoid such a punitive sentence. Because if you're looking at it and a prosecutor comes back and says, well, I'll offer you to plead to a 5-year cap, a 5-year count of conspiracy, as opposed to all these other offenses that you might get 20 or 30 years in prison if you're convicted.
And that's a really special circumstance. I mean, you're not going to get a 5-year cap in most cases.
No, I know,
in
but I
the
mean,
Southern District of Texas.
correct, and I agree with you. But I mean, even if you give
Viewers
them,
don't think that there's plea bargains.
no, but I mean, even if you get a 10-year,
They don't give you nothing.
even if you
Yeah.
get a 10-year cap, I mean, as opposed to a case that's looking at a 20, a 30, or up possibility of a sentence upon conviction after a trial, some clients will sit there and say, shoot, at least with a 10-year sentence, I can see a light at the end of the tunnel, something like that. Because again, there is no parole.
So on the federal side, what? You serve 8 and then what? Is that right? You serve, and then what happens?
It's about 85% of your sentence.
Right.
And then where do you go? What do you do?
You go to a
Halfway house.
Halfway house.
And then
then you-
supervised release.
And that, yeah, in the federal system, they have mandatory almost
Yeah.
supervision after you serve your jail. So instead of probation and not jail, it's automatically being supervised by the court for 1 to 5 years after.
For 1 to 5 years, indeterminate kind of
No matter
style?
what. Yeah, so if you don't appear, you do drugs, you commit a little crime, you're going to go back to jail in the federal system for violating your supervised release.
For the remaining time
You can get up to
for-
the remainder of your supervised release period.
of the supervised release period. So you could be supervisionally released for 5 years.
It depends
3
on
years?
the, it depends
Right,
on
sure.
the crime. It depends
Yeah.
on the crime. It's a
Wow.
whole system, but on average, it's a 3-year supervised release term or longer, and you can go to jail for 2 more years.
Okay, let's say you're out in a halfway house and under federal, out on a federal charge, and you pick up a state crime. What happened? Did the feds know about it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they
Does it? So would it be a revocation of your supervised release? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Really?
They do it after you figure out your state case, get some state time, and then you finish your sentence, and then the marshals pick you up, and take you
Oh
to federal court,
no!
and then you begin your federal revocation process.
And what's the standard? Is it a preponderance standard on violation?
Preponderance.
Really? Well, I
Yeah.
mean, if you've done time, then I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not going to win that one if you have a.
No, you're not.
are you entitled to a lawyer?
Yeah,
You are.
absolutely.
Damn right.
We're very important.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is on that. I mean, and I don't know how much a civil rights organization can do to help.
I mean,
that sort of
I want to set my sights realistically and just kind of work 1 minute at a time because, you know, at the end of the day, there's only so much one person can do. and
Right.
It's important to be hopeful and ambitious, but, you know,
I mean, because literally to change the federal system would take an act of Congress.
right.
Are you, so
It's not an exageration.
you live in Houston? You going to Austin?
No, I'm staying in Houston.
Really nice. That's
Yeah.
cool.
I wonder if I'll see the same judges. Like I wanted to tell you a story. The federal judges, you know, are appointed for life. So when we go for criminal sentencings, these judges see the same people or see people for similar crimes over and over again. And I had a meeting with the federal judge. She has tea in her chambers, and she let me and a colleague go. And she said, all right now, just tell me straight. I'm not going to give you any other chance. What do you hate about federal judges, or what bothers you about federal judges? And everyone's like, oh my God, were you like, oh, what do I say? And I was like, no, I know exactly what's
And
wrong
what'd
with
you
federal-
say?
They think they know before you say anything. And she was like, yeah, but I mean, sometimes you know, what else could you say? And I'm like, yeah. So that,
Exactly.
because then you go into court and these judges think they know, and you're like, let my client talk before you give them a sentence, but they think they know. And so, you know, as my friend would say, that judgment's done been written before you even stepped in.
Done been written.
Done been written.
Done been written.
We're out of time.
Done been written.
We done be out of time.
We done be getting out of here.
This is a good time.
Thanks for having
Glad
me.
to have you on the program.
Yeah,
I appreciate you coming on.
absolutely.
You were able to add some interesting insight to our program. I mean, I don't think we've had anybody from the Federal Public Defender's Office on before.
No, total great. And
the-
we
you were
look
the
forward to
first
having
one.
you back.
Yeah,
In my new.
that's right.
In
we
the
want to see
new
you back in
role.
your new capacity.
Great.
So.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have for this week, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to probably be off for the next 2 weeks, right?
We are off for next 2 weeks.
Yeah, we are off for the next 2 weeks, so we will be back first week of May with a brand new show and some brand new guests. So that's all for tonight. For Julio Vela and Natalia Cornelio, I'm Jimmy Ardwan. Good night.
Not guilty.